Hey, Emma here. Today is the fourth part in a series I have been doing about helping other people with anxiety and depression disorders. We've done anxiety, some tips for helping people with anxiety. We've done some tips for helping people with depression. Today I want to focus specifically on OCD. Now, the tips for people helping people with anxiety also applies with OCD because OCD is a symptom of anxiety. In our brain, we have part of our brain called the hippocampus, which is responsible for our habits and behaviour patterns. Now, I don't want to take too long to go into all the ins and outs of it. I have other videos and information and resources that explain this in much more depth. But basically, when somebody's anxiety levels go up, they trigger behaviours which your brain has locked into thinking that this helps. This helps us deal with a crisis, emergency, or disaster. Now, rationally, we know that washing your hands isn't going to necessarily help with a disaster or an emergency or in a crisis. But what comes from the hippocampus, these habits and behaviour patterns, are not rational. They have no logic to them and absolutely no relation to helping with a crisis, emergency, or danger at all. But they have links have formed between the amygdala, which is responsible for the fight or flight, and the hippocampus, which is responsible for habits. And the people who have OCD have linked a behaviour with their anxiety levels, and therefore they keep repeating those patterns. Now it's the anxiety levels that are going up that are triggering the behaviours. But what happens is that we end up focusing on the behaviours, on the OCD, rather than dealing with the anxiety. And that's not going to help. As long as the anxiety is there and the levels of anxiety are staying high, these triggers and these behaviour patterns will keep repeating themselves. So focusing on these patterns of behaviour is not helpful. And particularly unhelpful is trying to get somebody to stop these patterns of behaviour, because what you're doing is these. Don't forget these patterns in this person's primitive brain, not their rational brain, their primitive brain. Their brain believes that these are helping with a disaster, crisis, or emergency. So if you stop these things, their anxiety about the crisis, emergency, or a danger, it's going to go sky high. And actually you're going to cause more of a problem. You're going to create anxiety. You're going to worsen the behaviour by trying to get someone to stop the behaviours. But there are things you can do. Okay, I'm not saying you've got to just put up with it and tolerate it. Although if you watched part 1 of these series, I did say in that somebody will only be ready to receive help when they're ready, when they're able to. You cannot force help on somebody. So forcing help on somebody to stop their OCD habits is actually going to have the counter effect, and it's going to increase the anxiety and it's going to worsen the OCD habit. They have to get to that point on their own. And they will if you follow some of these simple tips. Okay? Mostly ignore it as much as you can. Do not bring attention, do not bring a focus to the OCD habit that they have created. Okay? Because every time they focus on it, it's replaying videos in their mind, and it's reinforcing the behaviour. But what you can do is you can point out to them when it is better, when they're not doing their habit. And for example, say somebody has a particular ritual around germs or around an infection or something, and you've noticed that they weren't as bad, or they didn't do it as much as they normally would at a particular time. Point it out to them. That will be helpful. So, for example, you might say, I noticed you weren't washing your hands as much today. Why was that? And get them to think about why it was better. And they might go, I don't know. But what were you doing today that you haven't done other days? What I want you to do is encourage the connection in their brain between when it is better and what they're doing. There will be something they were doing on those days that it is better for them. Now it will be, I can tell you what it will be in positive interaction. Okay, they might have been with people, so they didn't have time to think too much about themselves and their habits and their anxieties. So it could be positive interaction. They were doing things that were positive. They were being with people rather that were positive. Positive activity. They were doing something that was really good for them. They might have been involved in a hobby or sports or something. And during that time, they're not able to do their OCD habit because they're doing something positive. They won't have even thought about it. And positive thinking. When they're focused on something that's positive in their life, they won't be focusing on their anxiety and their OCD habit. Now, what you can do is you can learn to observe. If you want to go a step further, observe, try and make those connections for yourself. If they're struggling with those connections, try and make them for yourself. And you go, I've noticed that when you've been running, or when you've been to the cinema with so-and-so, or when you've spent time with somebody in particular, you're washing your hands, or the cleaning isn't as bad. You don't do it as much. Have you noticed that? And try and make these connections for them. So helping somebody with OCD is to try and help the person, or make the connections for them, or help them make the connections of when it's better. Because when you can focus on when things are better, you can do it again. You can work out what point of it, why it was better, and you can emulate that into other things. You can encourage that in other activities. You know, if it's better when you're with people, spend more time with people, spend less time on your own. If it's better when you're doing exercise, do more exercise, find more fun exercises to do, and so on and so on. So if you're trying to cope with somebody who has an OCD, an obsessive compulsive disorder, help them focus on when it's better, when their OCD isn't acting up as badly, and encourage them to do it again. So that's it for this series on how to help people. If there are other things that you would like me to talk about how to help people with, specific things, email me and ask, and I can always write a blog or do a video about that particular subject, because you can bet that if you're having to cope with that, somebody else is as well. You know, we're never alone, and that's one of the big messages about coping with anxiety or depression disorders. Feels like you're alone. It feels like nobody else understands, nobody else is going through it. But the truth is, you're not alone. Other people are going through the same thing. And by helping you with something that you might think is specific to you, I can bet you're helping somebody else as well if you ask me to talk about it. So always feel free to do that. If you want more videos like this, please subscribe, or you can also put yourself on the mailing list, and I will send you out any blogs or vlogs that are talking about these subjects. And also, you'll get a free hypnosis track. In the consequence, I will put the links underneath this video or underneath the actual blog. So until next time.